Barely a week into the ICEMAN rollout, and Aubrey Graham is already watching the internet light a fire under his throne that he absolutely did not see coming this time. And it is happening because somewhere in a bedroom on a laptop with nothing but a text prompt and a stolen voice model, a complete stranger pressed enter and accidentally created what may be the most talked about Kendrick Lamar verse of the entire year. And the wildest part of this whole thing, the part that has every hip-hop forum, every reaction channel, every group chat on the planet completely melting down right now, is that this verse is not real. Not a single bar of it came out of Kendrick's mouth. Not a single syllable was ever recorded in a real studio. There's no engineer, no producer, no cosign, no rollout, no cover art, no announcement. There is just a synthetic voice trained on years of Compton cadence pulling up uninvited and unloading on Drake like the machine personally watched the pop-out concert and decided to finish what its creator started. And before we even break down a single bar of what this AI track did to the conversation around ICEMAN, you have to understand the position this puts Drake in, because the ICEMAN album has barely had time to thaw on the streaming services. The disses on that project are still being decoded by every podcast in the culture. And now the public response. The one Drake fans were swearing up and down would never come because Kendrick is supposedly too mature, too elevated, too far past it. Just arrived. Except it did not arrive from Kendrick. It arrived from a robot. And the robot might have cooked harder than half the rappers signed to actual labels in 2026, which is exactly why we have to sit down and have this conversation, because what is happening here is not normal, it is not small, and it is absolutely not going away. So, before we dig into every single layer of this insanity, do me one quick favor and tap that like button, smash that subscribe, leave a comment, because when we start breaking down the bars line by line and start exposing what this AI track really did to the conversation around ICEMAN, the OVO loyalists, the Champagne Papi defenders, the entire Six God fan club are going to come crashing into the comments swinging. And we are going to need every single one of you in here to hold the line with the truth. And I'm telling you right now, by the time we finish unpacking why this fake Kendrick verse might be the realest moment Drake has faced since Not Like Us first dropped, you are going to be just as stunned, just as conflicted, and just as fascinated as everyone else who has heard this thing. Now, let me set the table properly, because the context here is everything. And if you skip the context, you miss the entire reason this AI track hits the way it hits. Drake just delivered ICEMAN, an album where he aggressively, almost obsessively took shots at Kendrick on track after track after track, sliding little jabs in, sneaking veiled references between bars, dropping wave cap lines, sea-walking lines, crypt-coded lines, lines about Dennis Graham, lines about his lawsuit, lines about his anxiety, his women, his ghostwriters, his entire mythology. And he did it knowing the silence on the other end was, in his mind, his shield. Because Drake calculated something very specific when he built this album. And that calculation was simple. He bet the whole house on the idea that Kendrick Lamar would never come down to his level a second time. He bet that the Pulitzer rapper, the Super Bowl headliner, the man who built GNX into a cultural monument would never spend another breath on the man who already got buried once. And for a moment, that bet was actually working. The streams were coming in, the press was running cover, the playlist was stacked, the OVO machine was humming, and the silence on the West Side felt like permission. But silence on the internet is a vacuum, and vacuums always get filled. And what filled this one is not what anyone expected. Enter the AI track. Enter the verse that no one asked for, no one approved, no one cleared, and yet everyone, and I mean everyone, is forwarding to their friends, looping in their cars, replaying on their phones, and discussing in every barbershop in America. The producer, the prompter, whoever it is behind the keyboard, dropped this thing onto the timeline with a label, with a disclaimer, with the word AI stamped on every corner of it. And within hours, the reaction wave was bigger than the rollout campaigns of artists with seven-figure marketing budgets. Reaction channels were lighting up. Comment sections were on fire. Long-form analysis videos were popping up before the sun went down. And the conversation shifted overnight from Drake's album to a Kendrick verse that does not even exist. That alone tells you something about the gravity Kendrick still carries in this rivalry, even when he is not speaking. His shadow is loud enough that a fake version of him can dominate the news cycle of the biggest streaming artist on the planet. Now, let me actually walk you through what this AI track is doing, because this is where it gets ridiculous. And this is where every honest listener has to swallow their pride and admit something uncomfortable. Whoever crafted these bars studied Kendrick like a thesis. They studied his cadence, his pocket, his breath control, his obsession with double entendres, his fascination with stacking imagery on top of imagery until a single line carries three meanings at once. The first stretch of the track opens up with a question, and the question is, framed exactly the way Kendrick frames his openers, the way he did on Euphoria, the way he did on Meet the Grahams. It interrogates Drake's victimhood directly, calls out the constant playing of the underdog, dismisses the manufactured persecution complex with one cold sentence, and then pivots into a controller metaphor that absolutely should not work as well as it does. The line maps Drake's situation onto a PlayStation controller. The squares around him become the squares on the pad. The X becomes the X in his eyes. The circle becomes the trap. He's stuck inside. And the triangle, the tiny triangle becomes Drake himself, dwarfed beside the king. The big K, the letter that means something entirely different in this rivalry. That kind of layered visual wordplay is exactly what made Kendrick the most feared lyricist of his generation. And the fact that a machine reconstructed it convincingly enough that grown adults are pausing the video to scream at their screens should genuinely terrify every artist who relies on craft to keep their seat at the table. And the verse keeps escalating. It moves from the controller imagery into the wolves at the door, into the moonlight making him nervous, into a creeping atmospheric paranoia that sounds lifted straight from the Mr. Morale notebook. It calls back to Hannah Montana, which honestly, and you have to laugh, is the one bar where the AI fumbles the reference because the predicting the future bit is a Raven-Symoné thing, not a Hannah Montana thing. And that small slip is genuinely the only moment in the entire verse where you can hear the machine breathing. Everywhere else, the seams are invisible. The track moves into accusations about Dennis Graham, accusations about exaggerating illness for sympathy, accusations about hiding behind PR narratives, accusations about courtroom theatrics. It throws in champagne references that flip Drake's own brand against him. It uses lowercase and uppercase as a courtroom metaphor that no joke sounds like a bar Kendrick would actually punch in. And then it pulls out the spiritual ammunition. It hits the religious angle, the morality angle, the fornication line, the family man line, the bones in the basement line, the not believing in streaming farming line, all of it stacked on top of each other in the exact same architecture Kendrick used to dismantle Drake during the original run. It even circles back to ASAP, references the rocky road, mirrors the wave cap warning, and lands the pull-up chants the same way Not Like Us did. The mirroring is so precise that you genuinely cannot tell whether the AI is paying homage or whether someone fed every Kendrick diss into the model and asked it to compose the encore. And here's the part that is going to keep me up at night for a long time, because this is where the conversation stops being about a fun viral moment and starts being about a structural earthquake under the entire culture. The track works. It actually works. People are streaming it. People are quoting it. People are writing it down. People are debating which bars are the hardest. People are saying out loud on camera with their full chest that if Kendrick himself dropped this exact verse with his real voice on a real beat through a real distributor, it would outstream every single track Drake just released on ICEMAN. And the only thing standing between this verse and chart domination is the small detail that the man whose voice carries it never agreed to any of it. And that is the haunting part. That is where every artist in this game should be losing sleep, because what this prompted just proved, accidentally or on purpose, is that the marketplace of attention does not care anymore whether the word came from a human heart or server farm. The marketplace just wants the feeling. It wants the catharsis. It wants the comeback. It wants the resolution to a story that the real participants stopped feeding it. And if the real participants will not deliver, the machine will. And the machine will get the clicks, the streams, the reposts, the reaction videos, and the cultural footprint anyway. Now, let me be very clear about my own position here. because I do not want to be misunderstood for a single second. I do not support AI music. I never have. I think the proliferation of synthetic voices, synthetic lyrics, synthetic performances poses a real existential threat to working artists, to ghostwriters, to engineers, to the entire ecosystem that turns a kid in a bedroom into a household name. AI music can absolutely strip a generation of musicians of the leverage they need to feed their families. AI music can absolutely flood streaming platforms with garbage that drowns out the real ones. AI music can absolutely be weaponized to put words in the mouths of artists who would never sign off on those words. And the fact that this particular AI track happens to be fire does not change any of those concerns. If anything, it makes those concerns louder, because the better the technology gets, the harder the fight becomes for the people who actually built this culture with their own breath. The only saving grace in this specific situation is that the prompter behind the verse did the bare minimum of decency. They labeled it. They stamped it. They made sure no listener could mistake it for the real thing. They did not try to pass it off as a leak. They did not try to monetize it as an official drop. They said up front, this is artificial. Do with it what you will. And that small act of transparency is the only thing keeping this moment from being a full-blown ethical disaster. But even with the label, even with the disclaimer, even with the watermark, the verse is still doing the cultural work that Kendrick himself has chosen not to do. And that is a complicated, uncomfortable, fascinating place for hip-hop to be standing in 2026. And what does it say about Drake specifically that the public is so starved for a response to him, that they will accept a robot delivering it? Let me sit on that question for a minute, because every single artist who has ever made a diss track in the history of this genre has wanted more than anything to provoke a real response. That is the entire point. You drop a record, the other rapper drops a record, the culture decides who won. That is the contract. That is the ritual. That is what makes battle rap battle rap. And Drake just put out an entire body of work that was clearly, openly, undeniably constructed to bait one specific response from one specific person. And that person decided he had better things to do. And so, the void he left got filled by code, by a script, by a model trained on someone else's brilliance. And the fact that the void filled itself, that the culture refused to let the silence sit, that thousands of people had to manufacture the answer themselves, because the real artist refused to give them one, is genuinely one of the most embarrassing developments Drake has ever been at the center of. And there have been many. Because think about what this actually means. It means the public no longer believes Kendrick is going to respond. It means the public has accepted that the war is over and the loser already lost. It means the appetite for is so massive that fans will accept a synthetic substitute, just to scratch the itch. And it means that Drake's entire strategy on ICEMAN, the strategy of provoking a response by sheer volume, has failed so completely that the response has to be hallucinated by a machine. And here's the next layer, because this story has more layers than anyone is talking about. And most of the people covering this clip are skipping over the part that actually matters. The producers and engineers and songwriters who actually contributed to ICEMAN. The underground artist Drake has been quietly pulling from for years. The ghostwriters who have shaped his catalog from behind the curtain. All of those people now have to live in a world where a single anonymous prompter working alone can produce a piece of content that outperforms their collective labor in the conversation cycle. That is going to break something in a lot of people. That is going to push a lot of artists toward asking why they are bothering at all, why they are spending months in studios when a stranger with an API key can move the needle harder in an afternoon. And that is the existential crisis the industry is sleepwalking into, because the labels are not preparing for it, the streaming services are not preparing for it, the publishing houses are not preparing for it. They are all too busy counting ICEMAN streams to notice that the floor is cracking under their feet. And here's something else nobody is sitting with long enough, something that I think deserves its own moment in this breakdown, because if you have followed this rivalry from the jump, from the original Control verse, from first-person shooter, from push-ups, from Family Matters, from Meet the Grahams, from Not Like Us, from the Pop Out concert, from the Super Bowl halftime show, you understand that Kendrick has spent the last 2 years methodically destroying Drake's mystique in front of the entire world. And he did it without ever raising his voice. He did it with patience. He did it with precision. He did it with the kind of restraint that turned every single one of his bars into a permanent piece of the historical record. And the genius of that strategy, the part the OVO camp still does not seem to grasp, is that the longer Kendrick stays silent now, the more powerful his silence becomes. Every day he does not respond to ICEMAN is another day ICEMAN ages worse. Every week that passes without a competent answer is another week the Drake camp has to spend explaining why the response never came. And into that pressurized silence, the AI verse stepped in and did something none of us anticipated. It proved that the conversation has so much demand for a Kendrick response that the demand is now manufacturing its own supply. That is the textbook definition of a cultural vacuum collapsing in on itself. That is what it looks like when a story refuses to end on the terms the loser wants. And the most cynical reading of this entire moment, the one I keep coming back to even though I do not want to, is that the same industry that is enabling Drake's documented pattern of taking from younger artists without proper credit is the same industry that is going to enable AI to take from every artist without any credit at all. Because if a billion-dollar machine looks at Drake's career and concludes that the lane to the top is built on extraction, on appropriation, on quiet exploitation of people who cannot fight back, then why on earth would that same machine resist the temptation to scale that strategy up infinitely using AI? It will not resist. It cannot resist. The incentives are too aligned. And what we are watching right now with this fake Kendrick verse going viral while the real Kendrick stays silent and the real Drake hides behind a wall of disses he knows will never get answered is the dress rehearsal for a future where every voice in music is a hostage to the highest bidder, the loudest prompt, the cleanest data set. And let me push this even further because I want to be honest about something the average reaction channel will not say out loud. The bars on this AI track, taken purely as bars, would absolutely qualify as a contender for the hardest Kendrick verse of the year if you did not know the source. The controller metaphor alone is the kind of line that would have wrapped Twitter in absolute ruins for a week. The lowercase versus uppercase courtroom flip is the kind of writing that ends up in genius annotations for the next decade. The ASAP Rocky Road redirect is the kind of pivot that real lyricists study. And the fact that all of that came from a machine with no engineer, no co-writer, no A&R feedback, no studio session, no second take, no mastering, no rollout should be sending shockwaves through every label boardroom in the country, because if a stranger with a laptop can build a verse that lands this hard, then the entire infrastructure of the music industry, the publishing deals, the producer credits, the engineer credits, the ghostwriter contracts, the catalog valuations, all of it is suddenly negotiable in ways it has never been negotiable before. And the people who own that infrastructure are not going to give it up easily. They are going to fight. They are going to litigate. They are going to lobby. They are going to write press releases. And in the meantime, the artists at the center of all of this, the real ones, the human ones, the ones who bled for the catalog, are going to be the last people considered in the conversation about what happens next. That is the story underneath the story. That is the part nobody on the reaction circuit wants to touch because it is uncomfortable, because it is complicated, because it does not generate easy clicks the way a punchline breakdown generates clicks. But that is what's actually happening, and pretending otherwise is part of the problem. Now, let me bring this back down to earth because I do not want to leave you in the doom spiral. There is still time. There is still room. There is still a window where the artists who shaped this culture can reclaim it, can demand the credits, can demand the protections, can demand the legislation, can demand the platform accountability that this moment is screaming for. But that window is closing fast. And the only reason it is closing fast is that the audience, the very audience that built every single one of these artists into the icons they are, keeps rewarding the shortcut, keeps streaming the AI track, keeps clicking the synthetic content, keeps engaging with the hallucinated drama. And until that audience makes a different choice, the incentives will keep tilting the wrong way. And the wrong way leads to a place where Kendrick Lamar, the most decorated lyricist of his generation, can be replaced by a voice clone in the public imagination, and where Drake, the biggest streamer of his generation, can be answered by a machine before the man he insulted ever finds it worth his time to reply. That is the actual headline here. Forget the bars, forget the chants, forget the controller metaphors and the courtroom punchlines. The actual headline is that the culture has accepted a substitute, and the substitute is winning, and nobody in a position of power is willing to say it out loud. So let me ask you the questions that this moment leaves on the table, because these are the questions that need answers, and these are the questions that the people who keep covering this story keep refusing to ask. If a fake Kendrick verse can outperform a real Drake album in the conversation, what does that say about the value of the real Drake album? If the public is satisfied with a machine answering on Kendrick's behalf, what does that say about Kendrick's strategic silence? If the prompter behind this track refused to monetize it and refused to mislead anyone, are they actually more ethical than the multi-platinum artist pulling beats out of unknown producers' DMs without proper credits? And if the industry refuses to address any of this, refuses to set a single guardrail, refuses to draw a single line, what exactly is going to stop the next prompter from doing something far less ethical, far less labeled, far less harmless? Those are the questions. Those are the only questions that matter coming out of this whole moment. And the silence on those questions is frankly louder than the AI verse itself. So, let me know in the comments what you think. Do you believe Kendrick should respond now that the bar has been set, even if it was set by a machine? Do you believe Drake should address the AI track directly? Or do you believe he is going to keep pretending it does not exist? Do you believe the prompter behind this verse did something brave by labeling it, or did something dangerous by releasing it at all? And do you believe the culture is strong enough to survive this next chapter? Or do you believe we are all watching the slow surrender of the most human art form we have ever produced to a tool that has no soul and no stake in any of it? Drop your thoughts. Hold nothing back. Tell me where you land. And if you made it this far in the video, I appreciate you more than you know. Because moments like this one need real conversation, not lazy reactions. And you sitting through this entire breakdown is exactly what keeps this channel alive. Smash that like, hit that subscribe, ring that bell, share this with a friend in your group chat who has been arguing about ICEMAN for a week straight, and let us flood this conversation with the truth before the machines flood it with anything else. Because the next chapter of this story is going to be wilder than the one we just lived through, and you are going to want to be locked in for every second of it. Every twist, every leak, every clapback, every receipt, every plot tine, and every uncomfortable truth that lands while everybody else is still pretending the AI verse was just a fun little internet moment instead of the cultural earthquake it actually is.